market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in Berlin. These are your top stories. Well, Germany's conservatives face a narrow path to power after winning the election. CDU leader Friedrich Merz says he'll form a coalition quickly to get the economy back on track. Now, the DAX outperforms its European peers as German stocks react to the prospect of increased spending under the Conservatives. Plus, as the war in Ukraine enters its fourth year, Volodymyr Zelensky says he'd step down as president if it guarantees peace and NATO membership. Now, we have a packed show, of course, live from Berlin, but first thing is first, let's also check what the markets are doing. Now, European stocks a little bit on the downside. Again, this is partly due to the results of German elections, which left mainstream parties short of votes needed to ease fiscal policy, but also lift the economy out of stagnation. A couple of other things we need to watch out for. Look, this week we have Eurozone CPI, we have rate decision from Israel, and of course we have earnings from Nvidia. A couple of other things we watch that's very tied to the German election. Not only euro dollar, let's get to that, but a couple of other things. For example, the German 10-year yield at 2.463, euro dollar 104.81. Now, Germany's conservative opposition leader, Friedrich Merz, faces intense pressure to move quickly to form a government. His center-right alliance won yesterday's election, but he'll need to form a coalition to govern. The preliminary tally showed the CDU-CSU bloc finishing ahead of the far-right Alternative for Germany and Chancellor Olaf Scholz's Social Democrats. Now, you can see the gains made by each party here. Now, Merz's alliance won about 28.6% of the vote, followed by 20.8% for the AfD. The SPD finished third with 16.4%. Well, Friedrich Merz has ruled out an alliance with the AfD, but he could form a two-way coalition with the SPD.
We ran a very tough election campaign. Nevertheless, this election campaign was really necessary. Also in the debate about the important and major issues of our country, about economic policy, migration, foreign and security policy, and internal security. But now we will talk to each other, and the most important thing is to reestablish a viable government in Germany as quickly as possible.
Now, for perspective and analysis, let's bring in Marcel Fratzscher, the president of economic think tank, the DIW Institute. Marcel, thank you so much for coming on today. When you look at the proposition, actually, for the Grand Coalition, a coalition between the Conservatives and the Social Democrats, now looks like the most likely outcome. What does that mean to financial, of course, spending, but also reforms?
My fear is not much, because these are the two parties who have been in power for the last 25 years or longer, and oftentimes in that combination, if you look at the people who will form the new government, they're mostly members who have been cabinet members already before. And if you look at the promises they made in the election debate, they have basically promised to move back to the past, to keep everything as is. So they clearly have not campaigned on a reform agenda. And given that they are very much focused on the past, I am not that optimistic that we will see courageous reforms.
But, Marcel, I mean, mainstream parties also won't have the two-thirds majority needed for constitutional change. What does that mean for the debt brake? How complicated is it going to be for this country to find the money needed for defense spending?
Well, reform of the debt brake was never really on the agenda, a really meaningful change of the debt brake, because we Germans love the debt brake, and the best we can do is to circumvent it, to go around it, as the previous government has done with the special purpose vehicle, special fund on defense. My hope is the new government will have a special fund on investment and a special fund on defense. That's the best they can do, but again, the question is, will it happen quickly? Will they be able to, will it be big enough to be credible?
It just feels clunky, right? It feels clunky. The courts could get involved. Is, you know, Germany's, I get, debt now more involved with the EU. I know we've heard from Friedrich Merz many times saying, look, he doesn't want to tap the ESM. Joint bonds seem to be off the table. But could there be a way that Germany, you know, lands itself closer to the EU to get this push?
My fear is it needs to get worse before that understanding sinks in. The mentality in Germany currently is we want to move back to the past. We don't want a stronger Europe. And there is not yet the understanding the best defense for Germany's interest is a strong Europe. And again, if you look at listen to Friedrich Merz during the election debate, he basically said, no, we don't want any of the major reforms. If you look at their reaction to the Draghi report, which came out last year, it was basically completely to say we don't want any of that, to reject all of the major proposals. But my hope is we look back to 2020, the Next Generation EU, which was created then. Now the challenge is a lot bigger than it was back then, and that realization has not sunk in. But once it will, my hope is that we will push forward.
Marcel, I mean, I was at the Munich Security Conference. I feel like there was a sea change, right? You're dealing with the Trump administration that's possibly more aggressive towards Germany. You had that J.D. Vance speech that put everything and should have maybe focused the minds. Have you not seen a sea change since the election of Donald Trump, even in Germany?
I would like to answer yes, but my fear is no. The debate has very much been on national politics. The European, the global dimension has not had much weight. People are worried about their own future, so they first look inward. But that needs to change, and the new government needs to have that courage to open up and to communicate very honestly to citizens. Look, the next 4 years will be tough. There will be economic hardship. Unemployment will rise. But that honesty has not been there. And that needs to change for Germany to go onto a reform agenda.
Marcel, thank you so much. Marcel Fratzscher, the president of the DIW Institute, stays with us, and we'll have a good conversation also on foreign policy. Now, we're just getting some IFO numbers. Germany, February IFO business confidence coming in at 85.2. That's a touch below, but nothing huge, below the estimate of 85.8, just a touch below. Now, we're joined by Clemens Fuest, the president of the IFO Institute. Mr. Fuest, as always, thank you so much for joining us. Does the result of yesterday's election make necessary reforms of economic policy more or less likely than a week ago?
I suppose it's more likely because there is the prospect of a coalition just consisting of two parties, or three, taking into account that the Conservative Party consists of two, but basically it is two-party coalition. So I guess that was, in terms of having a government which is able to act, this was the best possible outcome. It was close, but we now have two parties that have cooperated in the past and that hopefully see the situation, the difficult situation of the country, and get their act together and form a stable government. I think, yes, the opportunity is there.
What are the third things the new government actually need to tackle?
In my view, the key issue at the moment economically is the fact that private companies do not invest, or invest way too little. Private investment is currently 10% below the level of 2019. And that happens in a situation where we actually need more investment, or should expect more investment in decarbonization, investment in structural change. We urgently need new investment. We need more innovation, more startup companies, and we also need more willingness to work, to supply labor. These are the area where the government has to start, in my view.
But Mr. Fuest, how soon could any of the positive impacts actually materialize? And again, when you look at GDP growth forecast, it's not looking great. It could be as well below 1%. So how fast can some of the things, the good things that you're talking about, how fast could they kick in? People are holding back investment, people are holding back spending because there is a lack of trust. So if the coalition negotiations do not last too long, and if the new government comes up with an agenda that inspires confidence, the situation could change in the second half of the year. So I think improvements could come about rather quickly, but that's a matter of inspiring confidence and trust. All will depend on the agenda of the new government. Of course, there is also the international environment where the new government has little or no influence. A lot will, of course, depend on what Donald Trump
Trump does. If there's a trade war between Europe and the US, things could go south. But as far as domestic politics is concerned, I think there could be an impact relatively quickly, because this is mostly about trust and expectations for the future. And if that improves, that could have a relatively quick impact on investment, on consumption spending.
But talking about these trade tariffs, judging by Trump's actions so far, how big of a risk are trade wars with Germany?
There certainly is a risk of a trade war in that case between the EU and the US. So Donald Trump has announced tariffs on cars, for instance. That would, of course, hit the German economy, but Europe as a whole. Still, the experience with Donald Trump is that, yes, there's always room for negotiation, and the EU is a big market, and Donald Trump understands that. So the EU could strike back credibly. And will strike back. So the hope is that, the two parties will sit down together and come to reason.
I mean, it's very clear that Europe and Germany has to increase its defense capabilities. Could the German defense industry really benefit from that?
It could, but if we look at the industry at the moment, we see that a large part of it is already running at full capacity. It's not a very large industry. It is dominated by medium-sized companies. Rheinmetall is a large actor, but there are not many more. So what the defense industry needs is a clear, ideally multi-year commitment by the government, by the European governments, to spend more on defense. And in that case, they would invest and extend their capacity. I think that's what we need. And again, that will depend on a credible and multi-year agenda to spend more on defense.
Mr. Fuest, thank you so much, as always. Clemens Fuest there, the president of the IFO Institute. We have plenty more to come live from Berlin throughout the morning. This is Bloomberg.
We do have a very clear mandate. Friedrich Merz will be our next Chancellor in Germany. Olaf Scholz is done. And that's the good news of tonight. And we're going to change course of Germany. We will bring back growth. We will end illegal migration. We will meet our security needs, especially regarding to NATO goals. So yes, that's a clear mandate for a change of policy.
CDU lawmaker there, Jens Spahn, speaking to Oliver Crook last night, shortly after the exit polls were released. Now, you also just heard the CDU promising to bring economic growth back to Germany, end illegal migration, and meet the security needs of the country. Now, let's discuss all of these claims and whether the election result is a turning point for Europe's biggest economy. Bloomberg's EMEA News Director, Ross Matheson, joins us. Still with us, Marcel, Fratzscher, the president of the DIW Institute. So, Ross, welcome to the program. Marcel, thank you so much for sticking around. I mean, first of all, Ross, there's been a lot of news, right, over the last 24 hours. If you even leave Germany to one side, President Zelensky has said, look, he's ready to step down if that means more peace. That is a huge, of course, new news from Ukraine. And then we have a number of European leaders traveling to Washington to convince Donald Trump to cool off, I guess, Ukraine.
Well, that's right. So if anything, this is a reminder that for Merz coming in as German Chancellor, there's a host of challenges on his plate, and they're going to be quite urgent. I mean, domestically, obviously, you've got fundamental questions around the German economy, but further afield, you've got a very fast-moving geopolitical environment where you've got a lot happening very quickly. As you say, you've got the French president over in the US meeting Donald Trump today. They're going to sit in on a G7 leaders call. We have Russia and the US holding direct talks about Ukraine to push a ceasefire. And Merz needs to get in there. And so he's got to form a government pretty quickly. He's obviously putting a time frame on it of saying, I want to do this by Easter, but that's still almost 2 months away. And this is moving to the point that, the US president says he wants a ceasefire arranged for Ukraine by Easter. I mean, whether that's feasible still remains to be seen, but there's a lot of challenges here, and we haven't even talked about, what does it mean for the relationship with China?
Yeah, I mean, many questions. And again, we were on air yesterday with the German special, Marcel, and Friedrich Merz said the right things, saying no one's going to wait for us to do a coalition. But actually, 2 months, a lot can happen in 2 months. I mean, certainly if we look at the speed at which, we saw everything moving since January 19th, can they get something done quicker to have a functioning government in the next 4 weeks?
No, that's not how German politics works. We Germans put everything on paper. A coalition agreement is very thick, that's very detailed. That's the way governments work. They put an agenda up front, agree on things, and then they basically, for 4 years, try to tick every box. And so I think there's pretty much no chance to have a working government, a new government before Easter. But we still have the current government. That's, I think, the best hope, that Merz with Scholz currently, they really closely cooperate. There were a lot of fighting during the debate, but I hope they now cooperate better.
You hope or you think? Because it's a big difference. I mean, there's like EU leaders. Again, is it the legitimacy? Will Olaf Scholz go and speak in the voice of the CDU?
I mean, he can't, but certainly Olaf Scholz is a very professional politician. He will certainly make a transition easy, but still, if you don't have the Chancellor, the new Chancellor there, it's a completely different ballgame. So yes, the transition will be okay, but it will take at least 2 months for the new government to be there. And then I'm not, it's good that Friedrich Merz has a lot of experience across the Atlantic, that he's very pro-American, but at the same time he needs to engage more with Macron, with France, with Europe overall. And so far he has not signaled that he's willing to do so.
What do you think, Ross, the dynamics will be like between President Trump and Friedrich Merz? Again, Donald Trump actually taking to Truth Social yesterday to write, I guess, his support and almost congratulate the CDU on the win. But Germany has also really been in the firing line of the president.
Well, that's right. So it's going to be a delicate relationship, as we were just hearing. I mean, in a way, you can see a scenario where Donald Trump and Merz do get on. They are both conservative in nature, and it looks like there's talks already about how they can, talk at some point in the near future. But it's still a complex relationship because Merz has been a pretty avid supporter of Ukraine and sending missiles to Ukraine. In fact, he was the one pushing Olaf Scholz to do more and do it faster on Ukraine. So how does that play out in that conversation? Then, of course, you've got the question around tariffs. And, obviously, auto tariffs for Germany would be quite difficult for an industry that's already structurally floundering. And so how do you manage that in the conversation? Can Merz, for example, try and negotiate something specifically for Germany, but you're bound by the fact that you're in the EU, and so it's EU tariffs, and you don't really get passes for individual countries. So it'll be about developing a personal relationship with Donald Trump, but there are complexities there.
And as Roz was saying, what's critical is also how Germany will deal with China. What do we know about the Merz policies in dealing with the superpower?
Very little, because Friedrich Merz never really held a cabinet post, but the Conservatives have been very critical of China in the past. But at the same time, Germany is a very weak negotiating position. So the asymmetry of dependence is so big. So Germany is so much more dependent on China economically, in terms of trade, in terms of direct investment, in terms of resources and commodities, that he will not have a very strong negotiating position. And again, the best Germany can do, the next German government can do, is form a strong coalition in Europe, strengthen European institutions, have a joint approach. And both Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, and also Donald Trump have been very good in conquering and dividing Europe, and to kind of push against that, that would be the challenge for Friedrich Merz.
Okay, thank you both for a terrific briefing. Marcel Fratzscher there, the president of the DIW Institute, and Bloomberg's EMEA news director, Ross Matheson. Coming up, investors are digesting the results, of course, of this German election, which left mainstream parties short of the votes needed to govern alone. We'll dive deeper into the markets next. This is Bloomberg. Traders Peers hoping that Germany's election outcome will see a pivot towards increased spending and reforms that could reboot the stagnant economy. Well, let's dive deeper into the market reaction with Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel. Hi, Valerie.
Hey, Francine, good morning. It's been a bit of a back and forth session when it comes to German equities. This DAX, yes, it's in the green, up 0.8%. But last hour, it had flipped all the way into the red, but we're in the green at the moment. Euro-dollar briefly went above 105 handle. We failed at that again. We're now trading back below 105 at 104.79. Still in the green, but those gains are pale in comparison to what we had earlier. If you flip on, let's check on some single stocks. German defense names in the green. Rheinmetall up nearly 3%. BMW, Mercedes-Benz also trading strongly, and mid-caps, Francine, are trading quite well in Germany in the hopes of some more economic reforms to come. We flip on, let's just have a check on the German Bund yield curve, because it's at the moment not expecting very much when it comes to further debt issuance. We're mostly unchanged across the curve. Francine.
Valerie, thanks so much. Valerie Teitel there with some of the yields we're watching. Coming up, as Friedrich Merz wins the German election, will he be able to reform the country's debt brake to unleash growth? Now, this is one of the main questions when it comes to defense spending. We'll have a look, of course, at the possibilities of what happens next in German coalition government building. Euro gaining on the German election. I'm also looking at U.S. futures. Look, they're rebounding a touch. This is Bloomberg. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in Berlin, and these are your top stories. Now, Germany's conservatives face a narrow path to power after winning the election. Now, the CDU leader Friedrich Merz says he'll form a coalition quickly to get the economy back on track. The DAX outperforms its European peers as German stocks react to the prospect of increased spending under the Conservatives. Plus, as the war in Ukraine enters its fourth year, Volodymyr Zelensky says he'd step down as president if it guarantees peace and NATO membership. So Germany's conservative leader, Friedrich Merz, has emerged as the winner in yesterday's election. Now, the CDU-led bloc now faces intense pressure to move quickly to form a government. Let's break this all down with Kriti Gupta, who is here with me in Berlin. So, Kriti, we finally have the numbers. The two parties could actually form a grand coalition. Now starts the nitty-gritty about writing everything which party wants. Do we know the red lines?
We don't know the red lines yet, and this is, I think, the big kind of question mark in the air, because we know there's a long laundry list of what politicians, both at the SPD and at the CDU-CSU alliance, really want, and the Greens will throw in there as well, even the AFD: immigration, energy, military spend. Those are the three easy ones. The answer to each one seems to be loosening the debt brake a little bit and getting that fiscal spend in. But where that conversation starts and where it begins is really crucial. And the politics, the players are really important here, because the SPD and the CDU-CSU together don't have enough of a presence in Parliament to actually make this kind of rule change in the Constitution. That two-thirds majority that they need, they fall short. So the question here from the political standpoint is, what party are they willing to kind of partner with? Is it the AFD at the ultimately, where they've already ruled out they don't want to participate? Is it perhaps the hard left, or even the BSW as well? The FDP is now off the radar. Or do the Greens kind of come back to the rescue? And that partnership is perhaps where the talks begin.
Yeah, and the timeline is extremely important, because there's so much going on in the world with the U.S. president, tariffs, of course, what's going on in Ukraine. But it doesn't look like we'll have a functioning government before 2 months.
I mean, ambitious target for Friedrich Merz, right? By Easter, he says. But by Easter, so many things could happen. It'll be the first 100 days of the Donald Trump presidency. He's already in the States talking about what their military presence in the United States might look like, by the way, which is largely concentrated right here in Germany. So that, of course, is a sticking point as well. But the defense piece is crucial also. I think we had Hella Blackwell and Sharon Bell over at Goldman Sachs and BlackRock making the point that 70 to 80% of European defense spend is ultimately leaked back to Europe. You look at what the markets are doing. It's Rheinmetall, it's and other German defense companies that are kind of positioned the best and have been performing the best in the last 6 weeks, on the expectation that this is where Germany can kind of maybe pick up some of the underperformance that they've seen in the auto sector.
Kriti, thanks so much. Kriti Gupta there with the very latest, of course, on this German election. So mainstream parties short of the necessary votes to reform the so-called debt brake to unleash spending. Its opponents say the crisis-era measure has become a brake on growth and reform. Well, joining us now to discuss all of this is SPD candidate and economist Philippa Sigl-Gloeckner and Volker Wieland, who is chair of monetary economics at the Institute for Monetary and Stability, of course, Financial Stability at Goethe University, Frankfurt. So thank you both for joining us. Philippa, let's start off with you. What do we know going forward about some of the main negotiations? If Germany needs to increase defense spending, what are the options and what's more likely to happen?
Yes, I didn't hear you. That was a question to me?
It was to Philippa, but Volker, you can also kick us off.
Okay, it's my pleasure. I think the debt brake is a bit of a sideshow. I think what we need is an economic turnaround, which requires substantial deregulation, and that's possible. In terms of funding, I think the key need is for defense. And given how in just a week the geopolitical situation has developed, one can credibly claim that this is an emergency situation, and the debt brake has an emergency clause for exogenous events that are of significant financial impact on the budget. And so I think that would be the easiest way to raise funding for defense. But the main thing to turn around the economy is massive deregulation and a slimming down of the welfare state. I think deregulation is possible with the Social Democrats. The welfare state, that's a problem.
Philippa?
Yeah. Okay, now I can hear you. Sorry. It's a bit hard to understand. Well, I think it's actually going to be very, very challenging financially. Because, yeah, as you said, we don't have the two-thirds majority in Parliament to reform the debt brake. That emergency clause has limits on it, and especially if the spending needs are structural. And I think it's going to be hard to argue that they are a one-off short-term. The US has basically said that, Europe needs to stand on its own feet, so we expect higher defense spending for quite a while. So we're in a very, very tricky situation financially, and it's not quite obvious how that's going to be resolved.
So how much more difficult does this make things, Philippa, after the election yesterday? And what is the right way of dealing with everything in defense spending? Does the EU get involved? Does the ESM have to be tapped at some point?
Yeah. I mean, EU spending would help if it was outside the German debt brake. So if it was common EU spending, and yeah, it wouldn't fall under our deficit limit, but that would be very odd, right, for a country that has a lot of fiscal muscle, that has the safe euro asset, that then it needs to go to the EU because it can't figure it out itself. So I really hope that we get to a constructive solution. And defense is one big thing, but we have huge investment needs in all other bits of the economy. In order to return the economy to growth, to do everything we need to keep the country together, to renovate infrastructure. So I think we really need to find a domestic solution that works.
Volker, do you think that defense and investment will be reprioritized with the new government?
I think that's absolutely necessary. I disagree with Philippa. I think we actually have a situation where now the size of the government in terms of GDP is 48%, close to 50%. It's risen 5 percentage points since Corona. And basically all that money goes into subsidies, it goes into more social spending. It hasn't gone much into investment, it hasn't gone much into defense. There's lots of room to reprioritize. And I do agree on one thing with Philippa. Over the longer term, defense is a long-term issue. So in the long term, it has to be paid for not by additional debt, but by either tax increases or spending cuts. I think in terms of spending cuts, that's possible as soon as the economy is growing, and that means reprioritizing when the economy grows so that the increase goes into defense and investment. Both are actually currently pretty small, between 1.5% and 2% of GDP. Adding another % of GDP to defense would be 40 billion. I mean, just to put this in perspective, in the 80s, when I did my military service, we had 500,000 people in the army and in the troops in general. And we paid about 3.5% of GDP for that. So that's perfectly feasible if one reprioritizes spending and gets back to growth. And growth means deregulation. Growth doesn't happen because of more debt. Otherwise, we would have lots of growth, because since 2020, we had 4 years of an unlimited situation because of the emergency clause. So I don't think more debt and the focus on debt break reform, it's just not leading us forward.
Philippa, how much, I don't know whether you want to push back against that, but also how much do you think German defense industry and companies will benefit from the current environment?
How do you reprioritize? What do you do, right? You can't just take a magic wand and make social security spending go away. A lot of that is actually regulated by the constitution. So there's a constitutional limit on minimum what we need to give to people. That's actually what the court has said. So it's not like the government can just halve that. The one thing they can do is they can produce amazing growth numbers and put people back into jobs, and then social security spending can fall. But none of these numbers are in the dimension that we need. So I think it's actually going to be very, very tricky for the new government to find the money they need. Maybe just to show you the proportions, the government at the moment has between 40 and 50 billion every year for basically all projects they want to do. So around about 10% of the budget. The rest is in existing kind of legal obligations and personnel costs. And 40 to 50 billion, that is much less than the investment gap we have. The last government already fell short by 25 billion, so the math just doesn't add up. I think that's wishful thinking. Are German companies set to benefit from this new drive into defense? Yes, but only if we find the money. And one thing that the debt brake introduces is massive insecurity, because we never know whether the money is there in the next year. Now, as a defense contractor, you're not going to expand your capacity if you don't know whether the money is there. So what we really need is secured long-term financing.
Philippa, how quickly do you think this country will have a new government? How quickly can the negotiations for a coalition take place? Is 2 months earliest that we can get it done, or will it have to be delayed?
Well, I think they better get it done.
Let me ask Philippa, Volker, and then I'll come to you afterwards.
Sorry. Yeah. That is very, very quick. Since Friedrich Merz hasn't led a government yet, it's very hard to know how he negotiates. But my hope really is that everybody gets together quickly and does this quickly. The threat is pretty imminent, and we need to do something.
Volker?
Yes, I think we have to really arrive in reality, and the reality is not that we are in a easy situation which can be solved with a bit more debt. We need a complete turnaround in economic policy. The sooner the Social Democrats realize that, the better. So maybe Philippa can help there, as she's a member of the Social Democrats. But the current policy of the last and even the predecessor government has basically failed. And if you don't start massively deregulating, you don't get back to growth. That's the key step first. And if you keep saying that, oh, nothing can be changed because it's all somehow pinned down in laws, and then you're not going to change anything. And if that's the position the Social Democrats will take, this will really mean more years of stagnation. And Germany can't afford that, given the international challenges we're faced with.
Yeah, well, I guess it takes two to tango. But Philippa, do you want to answer that, and then we'll move on? Yes,
I do. I think when we talk about starting from reality, it's very important to actually do that and to look at very specific numbers. And that's what I'm missing a little bit. I mean, it's nice to say that in abstract we slashed the state, but then tell me where, give me the numbers on which areas and what the magnitude is. Jens Spahn proposed one reform last year, or one set of spending cuts, concrete spending cuts. The estimated savings from that were 10 billion. If you only took the constitutional ones, it was about 5 billion. Now 5 billion is nowhere near what we need at the moment. So let's be specific and talk numbers.
Yeah, of course. Happy
Okay,
to.
we'll talk a lot more numbers. Exactly, we're going to do this again, maybe in person, so we hear ourselves better. Philippa and Volker, thank you so much. SPD member Philippa Sigl-Gloeckner there, Volker Wieland from the Institute for Monetary and Financial Stability. Coming up, we'll have plenty more in Germany, but also Microsoft has begun canceling leases for a substantial amount of data center capacity in the US, raising questions whether the tech giant is growing cautious about demand. We'll bring you that story next, and this is Bloomberg.
Many of the technology companies in Europe, they should be valuing more and they should be investing more. So I think this is the right price for the Just Eat shareholders because we're paying a good premium. But at the same time, as I just told you, the leader company in China is a $100 billion company. The leader company in US is a $100 billion company. We are investing in Just Eat at the right price based on DCF. This is the right price to create a real big global leader.
The Prosus chief executive Fabrizio Blasi there speaking to Bloomberg about the company's $4.3 billion cash deal for Just Eat Takeaway. Now, if you look at the share price, this was an interesting deal. I have to say it's a massive deal. We also spoke to Blasi in the last couple of months. Now, all cash deal intraday, you can see Just Eat really flying 52% higher. Prosus a bit under pressure, 7.1% lower. Now, Microsoft has begun canceling leases for a substantial amount of data center capacity for building AI data centers in the U.S., a move that may reflect concerns about whether the company is actually growing cautious about the outlook for demand. Now, that's according to an analyst at TD Cowen. Well, joining us now from Hong Kong is Bloomberg's Peter Elstrom. Peter, as always, so good to speak to you. So what's going on with Microsoft's data center spending?
Yeah, well, just to step back a bit, Microsoft has been one of the big technology companies that is investing the most in AI and AI data centers in particular. They've talked about spending $80 billion this year on data center capacity. So this note from TD Cowen really raised a lot of questions. They said that there's evidence, they did some channel checks, they said that there's evidence that Microsoft has been canceling leases at data centers, totaling a couple hundred megawatts of data. They also said that they're stopping something called SOQs, the Statement of Qualifications, which is sort of the step before leases. In other words, they're pulling back pretty dramatically from some of their data center commitments in the U.S., and they're reallocating some of the spending that they were planning on doing internationally into the U.S. And overall, the analysts asked the question of whether Microsoft is getting concerned about whether AI is going to live up to the hype, whether in fact companies like Microsoft are pulling back a bit because they have not seen the pickup in demand for data centers. Now, to be clear, Microsoft has not confirmed this. They haven't talked about these details. We got in touch with them and they said they still are planning on spending that $80 billion through the end of their fiscal year, which is coming up in June. They didn't talk about what they're doing after that, but they said they're definitely going to spend that amount now. So it does raise questions about where exactly Microsoft is spending this money, what it means, and what the long-term demand for AI is going to be.
Yeah, and this, Peter, I guess suggests a material slowdown in international leasing. What would be the repercussions for tech in general, but also beyond?
Well, we've seen these fears ricochet through the market pretty rapidly. Of course, there's hundreds of billions of dollars being spent on AI capacity right now. Microsoft is just one of the companies. Meta, Amazon, Alphabet. We saw OpenAI and Stargate talk about spending $500 billion on capacity. So these are huge amounts of money. That money is being spent at companies like NVIDIA in particular to buy their chips, to put them into data centers. There are real estate deals that are behind this. So there's a whole ecosystem, which has really been the biggest boom area of technology over the past few years. That's fueled the stock market boom too, where you've seen NVIDIA race to a $3 trillion company. So if this spending starts to falter, if you start to see people begin to believe that AI demand is not going to live up to all this hype, maybe they don't need to spend hundreds of billions of dollars, maybe it's a bit less than that, that's going to take some air out of this bubble pretty quickly.
Peter, as always, thank you so much for the terrific briefing. Peter Elstrom, who leads our global tech coverage. Coming up, we're back, of course, here in Berlin. Germany's conservative leader, Friedrich Merz, lays out plans to form a coalition government by Easter. We'll have more on what that could look like and what it means to the debt break next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back, everyone. Now, Germany's highest stakes election in years is paving the way for a pivot to increase spending, with markets predicting the end of an era for constrained fiscal policy. But now the focus, of course, turns to the formation of a coalition government. And here to discuss all of this with me in Berlin is Chad Thomas, Bloomberg's executive editor for Europe. Chad, we had great fun on TV yesterday breaking the numbers, trying to understand what was happening next. What are the likely options now for a coalition?
Yeah, the picture's looking a lot clearer now this morning. Last night we were talking about how many parties were going to get into the Bundestag. Now we know that. Now we know that there's really one path to power for Friedrich Merz and the Christian Democrats, and that is a coalition with the Social Democrats. It's kind of funny that to be talking about that, because on the one hand, the Social Democrats, they had their worst results since World War II, but they, in the end, are the only option for the Christian Democrats. So despite doing very poorly in this election, they actually have a lot of power when it comes to the coalition negotiations. Expect them to try and extract everything that they can from Merz, including plum ministry posts like the finance ministry, and also they want more social spending, and so they'll push him on that front, surely as well. Merz had talked about actually cuts in social spending. Well, that seems quite unlikely if you're going to enter into a government with the Social Democrats.
And Chad, you've also been number crunching. I mean, we now have a much more clearer picture of what regions voted for, and if you look at the East, it's very clear that it tended to vote more for the extreme parties.
Yeah, it really is. If you're a mainstream party, it should be a wake-up call. So the AfD won in all of the 5 states in the former East. They got more than 30% of the vote. Then there are 2 far-left parties that did very well. You put those 3 parties together on the far left, the far right, 55% of the vote in the eastern states. So they have a majority there. So unless these mainstream parties come up with some sort of answer, one would expect that that's going to continue to grow.
I mean, the AfD, far right, above 20%. How much of a policy voice as main opposition party does it give it?
Well, one of the main things that will be a real challenge is if they want to have any reform of the debt break, the Christian Democrats, the Social Democrats, that seems very unlikely to be able to get through the Bundestag, because that would be a constitutional amendment. Constitutional amendments take a 2/3 majority. The AfD and the Left Party, they are against any potential reform there. And so there isn't a 2/3 majority for the mainstream parties. So they may be able to make some changes in terms of emergency spending, but an actual reform of the debt break looks unlikely. No. As we look at it this morning.
Yeah, and we're not expecting anything for Easter, which feels like a very long time away. Chad Thomas, thank you so much. Chad and his team, of course, will be working nonstop to bring you any update that we may have. Our executive editor for Europe. Now, you can continue following all of the news, all of the reaction to the German election on the Bloomberg terminal, and of course on our top live blog. Now, up next, a Bloomberg brief with Danny Berger in New York. They'll have a full German election countdown. There's also quite a lot going on with Emmanuel Macron going to Washington to speak to President Trump about Ukraine. This is Bloomberg.